she laughed when she said it. Get the test. Everyone else laughed too. So I did. And 1 week later, her boss was the first person to look at me like I wasn't a joke anymore. The evening was supposed to be light. Soft amber lights glowed above the long dining table, reflecting off polished wine glasses. The restaurant hummed with low jazz and overlapping conversations, forks against plates, laughter rising and falling in waves. It was her company's semi-formal gathering. I was the youngest person there by at least a decade. She looked stunning. At 42, she carried herself with a kind of effortless confidence that turned heads without trying. A fitted navy dress, elegant but understated. Her dark hair rested loosely against her shoulders, catching the light when she moved. When she laughed, it was full, unapologetic, magnetic. I'd always loved that about her. Our son had fallen asleep in his stroller beside the table, his tiny fingers curled around the edge of his blanket. I kept glancing down at him, feeling that quiet, grounding warmth in my chest. Fatherhood still felt surreal at 25, heavy in responsibility, but beautiful. The joke started casually. One of her colleagues, mid-40s, red wine already tinting his cheeks, leaned back in his chair and grinned at me. Man, you don't look old enough to have a kid. A few polite chuckles circled the table. I smiled. I'd heard that before. But then she placed her hand on my shoulder, squeezing lightly. The touch was warm. Familiar. Possessive in a subtle way. She tilted her head and laughed. Oh please, she said, waving her hand playfully. He's not your son, get the test. The table erupted. Laughter, louder this time. Sharper. For a second, I thought I misheard her. My smile froze before I could stop it. I felt the heat crawl slowly up my neck, settling uncomfortably behind my ears. She was still laughing. Her fingers slid from my shoulder down to rest briefly against my chest, as if steadying herself from the joke. The scent of her perfume, something soft and floral, mixed with the faint bitterness of wine. She leaned closer to me, her body brushing mine in a way that should have felt intimate. Instead, it felt like I was part of the punchline. I looked around the table. Some were laughing because she was laughing. A few avoided eye contact. And across from me, her boss, tall, composed, early 50s, wasn't laughing at all. He was watching. Not amused. Not judging. Just observing. I forced a chuckle. Yeah, I added quietly, trying to match her tone. Maybe I should. The words tasted wrong. Under the table, her hand slid onto my thigh. A slow, reassuring squeeze. The kind she gave when she wanted to show unity. Ownership. As if to say, relax, it's just a joke. But her eyes didn't meet mine. Instead, she took another sip of wine, smiling confidently as the conversation moved on. I glanced down at our son. His face looked so much like mine when he slept, the curve of his nose, the shape of his mouth. And suddenly, the room felt smaller. It wasn't the joke itself. It was how easily she said it. How easily everyone believed it could be true. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel like her partner. I felt young. Small. And strangely alone, sitting right beside the woman I loved. The drive home was quiet. Not tense. Not cold. Just normal. She hummed softly to the radio as she drove, one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other occasionally reaching over to squeeze my knee. The gesture was automatic, affectionate, the same way she always touched me when we were alone. But tonight, I couldn't stop replaying her voice in my head. He's not your son, get the test. The words had been playful. Smiling. Casual. But something about them lingered like a bruise you only notice once you press on it. When we got home, I carried our son upstairs. His small body felt warm against my chest, his breathing slow and steady. I held him a little longer than usual after laying him in his crib, studying his face in the dim glow of the night light. he had my eyebrows. Or maybe I just wanted him to. Downstairs, I could hear her heels against the hardwood floor, the familiar rhythm of her moving through the house. Confident. Grounded. Certain. By the time I walked into our bedroom, she was standing in front of the mirror, brushing her hair. The lamp beside the bed cast a soft golden light across her bare shoulders. She had changed into a loose silk nightgown, elegant, simple, age-appropriate but effortlessly beautiful. She caught my reflection in the mirror. "What?" she asked lightly, noticing the way I was looking at her. I stepped closer, resting my shoulder against the wall. "That joke tonight." She paused only for a fraction of a second before continuing to brush. "Oh God," she sighed, half amused. "You're still thinking about that. It wasn't funny." She turned then, leaning back against the dresser. Her expression wasn't cruel. It wasn't defensive either. Just mildly irritated. "It was just a joke," she said. "Everyone jokes like that. About paternity." Her lips pressed into a thin line, then curved into a soft smile. She walked toward me slowly, the silk fabric whispering against her skin with each step. When she reached me, she placed both hands gently on my chest. "You're too sensitive," she murmured. Her fingers were warm. Familiar. They slid upward, brushing lightly against the back of my neck. She leaned in and pressed a soft kiss to my cheek, lingering just a little longer than usual. It should have comforted me. Instead, I noticed something else. When she pulled back, her eyes flickered away for a split second, toward the bed, toward the floor, anywhere but mine. "You don't actually think," I started. She let out a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Of course not." But she didn't say it firmly. She didn't say it with the certainty I expected. She moved past me toward the bathroom, leaving the faint scent of her perfume hanging in the air. I stood there for a moment, listening to the sound of running water. Later, when we lay in bed, she curled against me like she always did. Her leg draped over mine. Her fingers tracing slow circles on my arm absent-mindedly. The physical closeness was there, warm, steady, intimate. But emotionally, something had shifted. I stared at the ceiling in the darkness, listening to her breathing slowly deepen as she fell asleep. Was she embarrassed of me in front of him? Did she regret being with someone younger? Or worse, had the thought crossed her mind before tonight? Carefully, so I wouldn't wake her, I reached for my phone on the nightstand. The room was silent except for her breathing beside me. I searched for a DNA test. Not because I didn't love my son. Not because I truly doubted. But because she had planted something inside me. And I needed it gone. The email said the results would take 5 to 7 days. I didn't tell her I'd ordered the test. I told myself it was temporary, just something to quiet the noise in my head. But the waiting did the opposite. It stretched time thin, made every small moment feel loaded. She didn't act guilty. She didn't act distant. If anything, she became softer. On Monday morning, as she adjusted her blazer in the hallway mirror, she reached for me before leaving. Her fingers slid into my hair, brushing it back from my forehead the way she did when she thought I looked tired. Then she leaned down and kissed my temple. "Don't overthink things," she whispered gently. It felt like she knew. That afternoon, while I was on the couch with our son asleep on my chest, she came home earlier than usual. She didn't go straight to change or check her laptop like she normally would. Instead, she sat beside me, closer than necessary, her thigh pressing against mine. She traced small circles along my wrist with her fingertips. Slow. Absent-minded. Intimate. "You're quiet lately," she said. "I'm just tired." Her eyes studied my face a moment too long. Not accusing. Searching. The house felt warm, late sunlight spilling through the curtains, dust floating in golden streaks. Our son stirred slightly between us, and she leaned in to kiss his forehead. Then, almost instinctively, she kissed my cheek too. But I noticed something else that week. Her phone buzzed more often. Her boss's name appeared on the screen frequently: meetings, late calls, last-minute presentations. I'd met him only a few times. Early 50s. Controlled. Observant. The kind of man who didn't waste words. On Wednesday, I picked her up from work because her car was in the shop. I waited in the lobby, hands in my pockets, feeling slightly out of place among tailored suits and polished shoes. When she walked out, she smiled immediately, that bright, confident smile she wore at events. But her boss walked out behind her. He paused when he saw me. There was no smirk. No judgment. Just that same steady look from the dinner. "You're her husband," he said calmly, extending his hand. I nodded. Yeah. His handshake was firm, measured. His gaze lingered a second longer than polite. "She speaks highly of you," he added. I wasn't sure if that was reassurance or evaluation. In the car ride home, she seemed lighter, almost playful. She rested her hand on my thigh while talking about her day, squeezing gently when she laughed. But every affectionate gesture felt like it carried something unspoken. Was she trying to reassure me? Or herself? That night, while she showered, I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I looked young. I knew I did. Sometimes when we were out together, strangers assumed she was older sister, not wife. Maybe the joke hadn't been about the baby. Maybe it was about how we looked. How we didn't fit expectations. On Friday evening, as I was cleaning the kitchen, my phone vibrated in my pocket. An email notification. My stomach tightened instantly. I didn't open it right away. I just stood there, hands resting against the counter, listening to the sound of her laughter from the living room as she played with our son. 5 to 7 days. It had only been 5. And suddenly, the house felt unbearably quiet, even with her laughter echoing through it. I opened the email in the garage. I don't know why I chose that spot. Maybe I needed the distance, a few extra walls between me and whatever the result would say. The air smelled faintly of motor oil and cold concrete. The overhead light flickered once before settling into a dull glow. My thumb hovered over the attachment for a few seconds. Then I tapped it. The document loaded slowly, clinical and plain. No emotion. No drama. Just numbers and certainty. Probability of paternity, 99. 99%. For a moment, I just stared at it. Relief didn't come the way I expected. There was no rush of joy, no triumphant satisfaction. Instead, something heavier settled in my chest. Because it wasn't about the test anymore. It was about the fact that I'd taken it. I thought about that dinner table. The laughter. The way she had said it so easily. The way everyone had believed it could be funny, because it was plausible. Because I looked too young. Because she looked too established. Because to them, I didn't quite fit beside her. I printed the result without rereading it. The sound of the printer felt louder than it should have. Inside the house, I could hear her voice in the living room, low and warm as she talked to our son. The domestic normalcy of it all felt surreal. I placed the folded paper on the kitchen counter and waited. When she walked in, she was barefoot, sleeves rolled up casually, hair tied back loosely. She looked relaxed. Comfortable. At home. She smiled when she saw me. "You're quiet tonight." I didn't answer right away. I slid the paper toward her. She looked down at it, confused at first. Then her expression changed, slowly, like something cracking beneath the surface. She opened it. Silence stretched between us. Her eyes scanned the page once. Then again. When she looked up, the confidence she carried so effortlessly at work and at dinner tables was gone. There was no defensiveness. No sarcasm. Just stillness. "You actually did it," she whispered. Her voice wasn't angry. It was small. "I needed to," I replied quietly. She pulled out a chair and sat down, almost as if her legs couldn't hold her anymore. Her fingers remained on the paper, pressing lightly against it like she needed to confirm it was real. "I didn't think you would," she said after a moment. "That's the problem." The words weren't sharp. They weren't loud. But they landed. She swallowed, blinking quickly. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked unsure of herself. Vulnerable in a way that didn't come from age, but from fear. "I was joking," she said softly. "I know. But it wasn't funny." She closed her eyes briefly, inhaling slowly. When she opened them again, there was something raw behind them. Not guilt. Not quite regret. Exposure. She stood up slowly and walked toward me. Not with her usual poise, but cautiously, like she wasn't sure how close she was allowed to come. When she stopped in front of me, her hand lifted instinctively, then hesitated before resting gently against my chest. "I never doubted you," she said, voice barely above a breath. But I realized something in that moment. Maybe she hadn't doubted the baby. Maybe she had doubted me. And somehow, that hurt more. The paper between us proved I was the father. But it didn't yet prove I was enough. Her hand was still resting against my chest when she exhaled, slow, uneven. For a woman who commanded boardrooms without raising her voice, who handled crises with a steady gaze and sharp decisions, she suddenly looked fragile. Not weak. Just unguarded. "I never doubted he was yours," she said again, more firmly this time, as if trying to convince herself as much as me. "Then why say it?" I asked gently. There was no accusation in my tone. Just exhaustion. She stepped back slightly, folding her arms, not defensively, but protectively. She walked toward the window, staring out into the dark backyard where the porch light cast a faint glow over the grass. "You don't hear what I hear," she said quietly. I didn't interrupt. "At work, at dinners, even with friends." She swallowed. "They don't say it directly. But it's there. The looks. The little comments. 'You're brave. He's so young. Let's see how long that lasts.'" Her voice tightened slightly on the last sentence. I felt something shift inside me. "It's like they're waiting," she continued. "Waiting for you to wake up one day and realize you could have someone your own age. Someone less complicated." She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "I built my life a certain way. I worked hard to be respected. And sometimes, when I walk into a room with you, I feel like they see me as foolish. Like I've made some reckless choice." I stepped closer, stopping just behind her. She didn't turn around. "So you made the joke first," I said quietly. "Yes." The word was barely audible. "If I laugh about it," she continued, "then it doesn't hurt when they think it." There it was. Not doubt. Defense. She finally turned to face me, her eyes glossy but steady. "You're confident in us," she said. "You don't seem bothered by what people think." "I am bothered," I admitted. "I just don't let them see it." Her lips parted slightly, surprised. "And when you said that," I continued carefully, "it wasn't just a joke. It felt like you were standing with them instead of with me." That landed. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. "I wasn't," she whispered. "I was scared." The word felt heavier than everything else she'd said. "Scared that one day you'll realize I'm older. That I'm already established. That I come with expectations. A child. A reputation. Responsibilities." Her voice softened. "And you'll decide you want something easier." I stepped closer until there was no space between us. Her breath hitched slightly as my hand settled gently at her waist, not possessive, not urgent. Just grounding. "I chose you," I said. "Not because it was easy. Because it was right." Her eyes searched mine for any sign of hesitation. When she didn't find one, something inside her finally gave way. She rested her forehead against my chest, her hand sliding up to grip the fabric of my shirt lightly. I felt her inhale shakily, then exhale against me. I hate that I made you question yourself, she murmured. I wrapped my arms around her, holding her firmly but gently. The kind of hold that says I'm here, not going anywhere. For the first time since the dinner, we weren't standing on opposite sides of something. We were standing in it together. And this time, neither of us was laughing. The work event was quieter than the last dinner. A private corporate reception held in a softly lit rooftop lounge. City lights shimmered beyond the glass walls, reflecting against polished marble floors. Conversations were lower here, more controlled. Strategic smiles instead of careless laughter. She stood beside me, fingers lightly hooked around my arm. Not possessive. Not performative. Just present. Her touch felt different tonight. Not claiming me, but choosing me. She looked stunning again. A deep emerald dress, structured but elegant. Her hair pinned up this time, revealing the graceful line of her neck. She carried herself with her usual authority, but I could feel the subtle tension in her fingers when someone's eyes lingered too long on us. I squeezed her hand once. She glanced at me, and for a second, her expression softened, grateful. Later in the evening, while she was pulled into a conversation with senior partners, I stepped toward the balcony for air. The cool night breeze felt steady against my skin. I heard footsteps behind me. Her boss. He stopped beside me, resting his hands casually against the railing. The city stretched out below us, quiet and distant. She told me, he said calmly. There was no accusation in his voice. No curiosity either. Just fact. About the test. I asked. He nodded once. Silence settled between us for a moment, broken only by faint music drifting from inside. You handled that well, he said after a beat. I let out a small breath. I didn't feel like I did. He studied the skyline before speaking again. She's been defensive for months, he said. Not about you directly. About perception. I turned slightly toward him. People talk, he continued. They question her judgment. They assume you're temporary. His voice stayed even, professional. She hears it more than you think. I thought back to the way she'd stood at the dinner table. Laughing first. Controlling the narrative. She's worked hard to be taken seriously, he added. Sometimes when someone builds something that solid, they're terrified of the one thing they can't control. Love. I said quietly. He gave the smallest hint of a smile. Exactly. I exhaled slowly. I thought you were judging me that night, I admitted. At dinner. I nodded. He shook his head. I wasn't judging you. I was watching her. That caught my attention. She looked insecure, he continued. And that's rare. I glanced back through the glass wall. She was laughing politely with colleagues, but her eyes flickered around the room until they landed on me. And stayed there. She's not worried about the child, he said firmly. She's worried about losing you. The simplicity of that statement settled something deep inside me. Not because it boosted my ego. But because it reframed everything. The joke. The distance. The fear. It hadn't been about doubting me. It had been about fearing she wasn't enough to keep me. Her boss stepped back from the railing. For what it's worth, he added, she fights harder in rooms when you're in them. I looked at him, surprised. She stands taller. He gave a short nod before heading back inside. Left alone on the balcony, I watched her through the glass. Confident. Composed. Beautiful. And for the first time since that night, I didn't feel small beside her. I felt steady. Not younger. Not lesser. Just hers. That night, the house felt different. Not lighter exactly, but calmer. Like something unsettled had finally found its place. Our son was already asleep when we got home. She checked on him first, brushing her fingers gently through his hair, lingering there a second longer than usual. I watched from the doorway as she stood over his crib, her expression soft and reflective. When she stepped back into the hallway, she didn't say anything. She just reached for my hand. Her fingers intertwined with mine, slow, deliberate. Not out of habit. Out of intention. We went downstairs, leaving the lights dim. The living room was lit only by the small lamp near the couch. She kicked off her heels and curled her legs beneath her as she sat, exhaling deeply. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she looked at me. Not confidently. Not defensively. Just honestly. "I'm sorry," she said. There were no justifications this time. No explanations wrapped in pride. I thought if I laughed first, she continued quietly, then it wouldn't hurt when others did. She swallowed. "But I didn't realize I was hurting you instead." I moved closer on the couch until our knees touched. "You didn't make me doubt him," I said softly. "You made me doubt us." Her eyes filled slightly at that, but she didn't look away. "I don't ever want you to feel like you're standing alone beside me," she said. "Not in a room. Not at a table. Not anywhere." I reached up, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. My fingers lingered there for a second, tracing lightly along her jaw. Her breath slowed at the touch. "Then don't test me in public," I replied gently. "If you're scared, tell me. I can handle fear. I just can't handle being made into a joke." She nodded slowly. "I was afraid you'd wake up one day and realize you could have someone younger," she admitted. I gave a small, almost amused exhale. "You do realize I already have someone older?" That earned the faintest smile from her. I shifted closer, wrapping my arm around her waist. She leaned into me without hesitation this time, resting her head against my shoulder. The tension that had lived quietly between us all week finally dissolved in that simple closeness. "I chose you," I said again, firmer now. "Not because you're older. Not because you're impressive. Not because you're successful." I paused, feeling her hand slide slowly across my chest. "I chose you because you feel like home." Her fingers curled slightly into my shirt. "You don't have to prove you're strong all the time," I added. "Not with me." She tilted her face upward then, pressing a slow, lingering kiss to my cheek. "Not playful. Not possessive. Grateful." "I trust you," she whispered. And this time, it felt complete. I pulled her fully into my arms, holding her in a way that wasn't about reassurance anymore, it was about certainty. Her heartbeat was steady beneath my palm as I rested my hand against her back. The world outside would still talk. They would still notice the difference in our ages, our timelines, our expectations. But inside this house, inside this quiet moment, none of that mattered. I didn't take the test to prove I was the father. I took it because I needed to prove something to myself. And tonight, she finally looked at me the way I'd been waiting for her to. Not like a younger man trying to keep up. But like her partner. Equal. Chosen. Secure.